that wanted attention and one that had made up its mind. This one had made up its mind. The rain came sideways, the kind that rendered umbrella a theoretical concept, and by the time her shift ended at 2 a.m, the diner's heating system had given up entirely, and the roads on the east side were reporting flash flood closures on every app she owned. Her apartment was 40 minutes on a bus that wasn't running. She stood in the diner doorway in her coat and her work apron she'd forgotten to take off, and looked at the dark street and assessed her options with the practical efficiency of someone who had been assessing bad options since she was 7 years old. Option 1. Stay in the diner, no heat, temperature dropping, owner definitely not paying overtime. Option 2. Walk. She walked. The East Hills of Portland at 2 a.m. in a flood-level storm were not, it turned out, an environment that rewarded optimism. She made it 4 blocks before the road dipped and the water came over her boots, and she stood on the sidewalk in the dark doing a rapid recalculation while the rain made its argument against every decision she'd made in the last hour. The hill above her had lights. Not many, just the upper floor of a large Victorian that sat back from the road behind an iron fence and a lot of old-growth fir trees, the kind of house that announced its own history by the way it occupied space. She had walked past it on her route for 2 years and never seen it lit at this hour. She had never seen anyone go in or come out. She looked at the flooded road. She looked at the lights. She opened the gate. The path to the front door was stone, old and uneven, bordered by rhododendrons that had grown to the size of small trees. Her flashlight, phone flashlight, nearly at 15% battery, lit the way in a wobbling circle. The house got larger as she approached, which houses did when you walked toward them, but this one did it with more conviction than most, the Victorian details resolving out of the dark, the wraparound porch, the stained glass panels beside the front door, the brass knocker shaped like something she couldn't quite make out. She knocked. Silence. She knocked again, harder, because she was wet through and cold, and had exactly the level of dignity left that came with standing on a stranger's porch at 2 a.m. in a work apron. The door opened. The man in the doorway was not what she'd built in her head during the walk up the path. She'd been expecting elderly, reclusive, the specific category of Portland eccentric that bought Victorian mansions and never left them. What she got was tall, dark-haired, and carrying the kind of stillness that wasn't the stillness of someone calm, but the stillness of something that had stopped needing to move in order to be present. His eyes were dark. The porch light caught them at an angle, and for 1 second they weren't dark at all. Amber, deep and lit from somewhere behind the surface, the color of something that had been burning for a long time. He looked at her. She looked at him. "The roads are flooded," she said, because this seemed like the most factually useful place to start. "I work at the diner on Morrison. My apartment is in Selwood. The buses aren't running, and I've been walking for 20 minutes and your lights were on." She paused. "I'm not dangerous. I'm a waitress. I have a name tag." She looked down. The name tag was there, slightly crooked, ran in block letters above the diner logo. "I just need somewhere to wait out the worst of it. A porch is fine. I have a fully charged," she checked her phone, "14% battery, and I won't bother you." He had not moved during any of this. He looked at her for a moment longer, not rude, exactly, more like someone processing a situation that had arrived outside normal parameters and taking the necessary time. His gaze moved from her face to the name tag to her boots, which were visibly full of water, to the road behind her where the flooding was now visible even from the porch. He stepped back from the door. "Come in," he said. His voice was low, precise, the particular diction of someone who had learned English when words were still treated as deliberate things. She registered this without being able to explain why it landed the way it did, like something being said carefully, on purpose, after a long time of not saying much at all. She came in. The entry hall was warm, genuinely warm, Not the struggling warmth of a system trying to compensate, but the deep settled warmth of a house with good bones and a working fireplace somewhere close. She could smell it, old wood, beeswax, something darker underneath that she couldn't name. The scent of a place that had been lived in for a very long time by something that had very particular habits. She dripped on the entry hall rug, which was probably worth more than her rent. She started, gesturing vaguely at herself at the water situation. There are towels in the hall closet. He indicated a door to the left. The sitting room has a fire. First right. He turned and walked deeper into the house with the fluid, unhurried movement of someone who had never once been in a room that didn't accommodate him, and she stood in the entry hall for a moment with her phone light still on and her boots full of water and the distinct, peculiar feeling that she had stepped through something. Not a door exactly, more like the seam between the ordinary world and somewhere that ran on different rules. She got a towel. She found the sitting room. The fire was real, wood burning, the kind of heat that came from an actual source rather than a thermostat's best guess. The room was full of books, floor to ceiling, the shelves built into the walls like the house had been designed around them, which it probably had. Furniture that was old in the way that meant quality rather than neglect. A single lamp on the side table, throwing warm light across a desk where papers were arranged with the precision of someone who knew where everything was and required it to stay there. She sat on the edge of the nearest chair, didn't sink into it, just perched. The habit of someone who had learned not to take up too much space in rooms that belonged to other people. The man had not reappeared. She wrung out her braid over the towel and looked at the fire and listened to the storm throw itself against the windows with the fury of something that had been reasonable for too long. Her phone died. She sat in the firelight in a vampire's house, she didn't know that yet, and waited, which was the thing she had always been best at, and the fire burned, and somewhere in the house something moved with the patience of 600 years, deciding what to do about the girl who had knocked on the wrong door at exactly the right moment, what he does with guests he doesn't have. He brought her tea. She registered this as extraordinary approximately 3 seconds after he set the cup on the side table beside her, because she had been watching the fire and hadn't heard him coming, and the man moved like sound had given him a professional courtesy exemption. The cup was real ceramic, the tea was already the right temperature, and he had added nothing to it. No milk, no sugar, which was correct, which he had no way of knowing. She looked at the cup, then at him. "You didn't ask how I take it," she said. "No." He settled into the chair across from her, not quickly, not performing comfort, just the deliberate arrangement of someone who sat in chairs the way they did everything else, with full intention. "You didn't look like someone who complicated it." Ren picked up the cup. The warmth went through her hands immediately, up her wrists into the cold that had settled in her bones on the walk up the hill. "That's either very perceptive or a very lucky guess. I've had time to develop the skill," he said. She looked at him over the rim of the cup. The firelight was doing something specific to his face, the way it moved across the planes of it, the jaw, the darkness of his eyes. He was watching her with the focused patience of someone who genuinely had nowhere else to be and no performance to give. "Caius Viel," he said. "Since you're in my house, Ren Calloway." She set the cup down. "Since you let me in." The name tag established the first name. The name tag establishes that I work at a diner and someone thought block letters were the most legible option. She looked at it. "I've been meaning to ask for a new one. The apostrophe in the logo is in the wrong place and it bothers me every shift." He was quiet for a moment. Something moved in his expression, not a smile, the infrastructure of one, the way a building looked before anyone moved in. "How long have you worked there?" he asked. 2 years. Since I came to Portland." She looked at the fire. "I was in Seattle before that. Tacoma before that. I move around." "What brings you to Portland specifically?" "It was raining when I got off the bus and I didn't want to get back on." She said it simply, the way she said most true things, because she had learned that the truth delivered plainly confused people who were expecting a story. Sometimes a place is just where you are when you stop. He looked at her with the specific attention of someone filing something away. The flooding, he said, which was a redirection she noticed but didn't push. It will be worse by morning. The East Side Road access typically closes entirely when Morrison runs. I figured. She pulled her damp coat tighter. I can sleep in the chair if that's. I'll be gone as soon as the road's clear. I don't need anything. There's a guest room, he said. She looked at him. It hasn't been used recently, he added, which was the kind of qualifier that could mean several things, and his tone suggested he was aware of all of them and was not going to clarify. Mr. Vael. Caius. The name felt strange in her mouth, old-fashioned in a way that suited him. I appreciate the fire and the tea, and I'm not going to pretend the chair is fine if there's an actual bed. But I want to be clear that I'm not. I don't need anything from you beyond the basics of not drowning, and you shouldn't feel obligated to. I don't feel obligated, he said. I feel that you're cold and the guest room exists and the alternative is watching you perform contentment in that chair for the next 8 hours, which would be tiresome for both of us. The directness of that was so complete she almost laughed. She pressed her lips together. Okay, she said. He showed her the guest room, second floor, end of the hall, a bed that had the specific quality of very old furniture that had been maintained with total dedication. The sheets were cold but clean, a bathroom with towels thicker than anything she owned. There's a shirt in the closet, he said from the doorway. The previous owner left things. A pause. Several decades ago. She turned around. How long have you lived here? He looked at the room as if considering the question from multiple angles. Long enough, he said, that I've stopped counting in the way people usually count. She stood in the middle of the guest room in her damp work clothes and looked at him in the doorway and felt the distinct sensation of being in a story that had started before she arrived, that had been waiting, that had a shape she couldn't see yet from the inside. Good night, Wren, he said. He pulled the door closed. She found the shirt in the closet, men's, old cotton, faded to the color of fog, and changed into it and got into the cold bed and listened to the storm outside and the deep, specific silence of a house with only one person in it. Except it didn't feel like one person. It felt like many, all at once, layered in the walls. She slept anyway because she was 21 and had walked 20 minutes in a flood and her feet hurt, and the bed was warm, and in the morning she would be practical about all of it. She did not hear him in the hallway at 3 a.m., standing outside the closed door for 12 seconds before continuing to the study. She did not hear him at all. She woke to rain and the smell of coffee, the rain she expected. The coffee was more complicated, because she was in a stranger's house, and strangers' houses did not typically produce coffee unless you produced yourself first and asked for it, and she had not done either of those things. She went downstairs. He was in the kitchen, large, old-fashioned, the kind of kitchen that had been updated once in the last century and considered that sufficient. He was at the counter with his back to her, doing something with a French press with the focused attention he appeared to bring to everything. He was in different clothes than the night before, dark trousers, a gray shirt with the sleeves pushed up, and she registered, in the specific clinical way she registered things she didn't plan to think about further, that his forearms were the forearms of someone who had once done physical work, before whatever he did now. The Morrison Bridge closed at 6, he said, without turning around. The Selwood Bridge is underwater. East Side access is fully cut until at least tomorrow afternoon. Wren stood in the kitchen doorway absorbing this. Tomorrow afternoon. Optimistically. He turned, set a mug on the table. Sit down. You keep telling me to do things. You keep standing in doorways. She sat down. The coffee was black, which was correct, which again he had no way of knowing. "Do you always make coffee you don't drink?" she asked. He looked at the mug in his own hand. It was empty. She had noticed this a second before she asked, and now waited to see how he handled it. "Habit," he said. "From a long time ago." "How long ago?" A pause. He sat down across from her, same chair as last night, she realized, which meant last night's arrangement hadn't been random. He sat where he could see both her and the door, which was exactly where she sat in every diner booth she'd ever occupied. "Long enough," he said again, "that the coffee is more memory than need." She wrapped both hands around the mug. Outside, the rain made its case against every window in the house simultaneously. "I should tell you something," she said. He waited. "I don't have anywhere urgent to be," she said. "The diner will be closed. I have 3 days off after today, regardless. I'm not going to be difficult about being stuck here. I just want you to know that I'm aware this is an imposition, and I'm going to stay out of your way as much as possible, and I don't need entertaining." He looked at her steadily. "I wasn't planning to entertain you." "Good." She drank the coffee. It was excellent, which seemed on brand. "What do you do all day?" "Work." "What kind?" "Territory management." He said it evenly, the way someone said a true thing that was also not the whole truth. There are always decisions to make. Territory. She turned the word over. "Like property?" "Like property," he agreed, which was also not the whole truth, and she filed this under things that were none of her business. She spent the morning in the sitting room with a book she'd taken from the shelves, Duchess, which she'd been meaning to read for 2 years and hadn't gotten to, while he worked at the desk in the corner with the specific self-contained focus of someone who had learned to work in the presence of other people without requiring their absence. It was not uncomfortable. That was the thing she kept returning to, circling from different angles. It was not uncomfortable. She was used to reading people's discomfort with her presence. She had a good radar for it, developed young. The particular sensitivity of someone who had spent years in houses where she was tolerated rather than wanted. The alert system that told her when to make herself smaller. It wasn't going off. At noon, she went to the kitchen and made herself a sandwich from what she found in the refrigerator, which was, she noted, very specifically stocked for a person who described coffee as a memory rather than a need. Vegetables, bread, cheese, fruit. The kind of food bought for the idea of eating rather than the habit of it. She made 2 sandwiches. She brought one to the desk. He looked at the plate. Then at her. "You don't eat," she said. "I'm guessing. But you should have the option." She set it down and went back to her chair and opened the Borgies. "I'm not trying to make a point. I just had the ingredients." He looked at the sandwich for a long moment. Then, he picked it up. She read her book. He ate approximately half the sandwich with the manner of someone doing something they had decided to do and were not going to discuss, and then he went back to his papers. At 3 in the afternoon, the power flickered. They both looked at the ceiling. "Generator," he said. "It will hold. How old is it?" "The generator." He considered. "Newer than the house. The house is older." "How old is the house?" He looked up from his papers. The amber thing happened in his eyes again. That depth, that specific quality of light that didn't belong to reflected fire or reflected lamp, but seemed to come from somewhere further back. 1887, he said. Original owner? A pause, just long enough to be the wrong length for a simple answer. Something like that, he said. She looked at him for a moment. He held the look with the composure of someone who had held harder ones. She went back to Duchess. Outside, the storm pressed on with the conviction of something that had made a decision and wasn't reconsidering. Inside, the fire burned, the desk lamp held, and 2 people who had no particular reason to trust each other sat in the same room and did so anyway, which was either very simple or the most complicated thing that had happened in that house in a long time. Probably the latter. She found candles on the nightstand the second morning. 3 of them, already in holders, a box of matches beside them, placed there between when she'd gone to bed and when she'd woken up, because they hadn't been there when she slept. She looked at them for a moment. The power had flickered twice in the night. She had mentioned, at dinner, he had sat with her at dinner, not eating, drinking something from a dark glass she had the tact not to ask about, that she disliked waking in the dark in unfamiliar places. She had mentioned it once, in passing, while talking about the apartment in Tacoma where the electricity had been unreliable. She lit one of the candles and got dressed and went downstairs and did not say anything about it, because he clearly hadn't intended her to make a production of it, and she understood the language of gestures that didn't want to be acknowledged. He was already in the study when she came down. The coffee was already made. She was starting to understand the rhythm of him. He didn't sleep, or if he did, she'd seen no evidence of it. He was always in the study when she came down and always in the study when she went to bed, and she had stopped building the question into a shape she was going to ask out loud. There were things about Caius Viel that she was assembling slowly, piece by piece, and she was being careful about the assembling. "The flooding is supposed to peak today," he said without looking up, "and begin receding tonight. So tomorrow afternoon," he said, "possibly evening." She poured her coffee, looked at the gray, wet world outside the kitchen window, the garden just visible through the rain, overgrown in the particular way of gardens that had been beautiful once and were still beautiful in a different way. "Did you plant that?" she asked. He came to stand beside her at the window, close enough that she was aware of the drop in temperature, not dramatic, just present, like standing near a window rather than a wall. He looked at the garden. "The roses," he said. "Originally. The rest," a pause. "The rest planted itself over a very long time and I let it. I like it better that way," she said. "Gardens that plan themselves." He looked at her. "Most people," he said, "prefer order. Most people haven't lived in enough places to know that order is just what happens when something is new." She drank her coffee. "Give it time and it goes its own way. Better to work with it." He was quiet for a moment, looking at the garden. She was aware of him looking at it and aware of something happening in the quality of the silence, a small shift, like a room changing temperature by 1 degree. "You've lived in many places," he said. "Foster care," she said, the way she always said it, plain, no performance, just the fact. 12 placements between 7 and 18. Then, on my own, she looked at the rain. "You learn not to redecorate." He said nothing. She had learned the difference between silences that wanted filling and silences that were doing something on their own, and this was the latter. "My brother," he said, after a moment, was not given a choice about what he became. She turned to look at him. He was still looking at the garden. "He was young," Caius said. 23. He didn't. I should have protected him and I didn't, and what he is now is something he didn't ask for, and the distance between us is—" He stopped. "Reset. Long." "How long?" He turned to look at her. 300 years, approximately. She held his gaze. "Approximately," she said. "The middle centuries blur somewhat." She looked back at the garden. Her coffee was warm in her hands. Something in her chest had done something she was going to examine later, privately, the specific sensation of understanding being offered, the rarity of it, the way it felt like something being handed across a distance with care. "I had a foster brother," she said. "Marcus. We were in the same house for 2 years. He aged out before me and we lost track." She paused. "I've looked." "A few times. Did you find him?" "Not yet." She set down the mug. "I haven't stopped." He looked at her for a long moment, the focused, careful look she was starting to recognize as his version of something other people did with words. "I stopped," he said, "looking for Dorian. I told myself the distance was his choice, and eventually I believed it." "Is it? His choice?" A pause. "Partly," he said, "and partly mine." which is the harder part to hold. She nodded. Outside, a branch moved in the garden, whined through the roses he'd planted, however long ago, in a life she was only beginning to understand the shape of. "I'm going to make breakfast," she said. "You should sit in the kitchen while I do. You don't have to eat anything. Just sit." He looked at her for one beat. Then he followed her to the kitchen. She made eggs she'd found in the refrigerator. His, or the idea of his, she'd stopped asking. And he sat at the table with the empty coffee mug and watched her cook, with the expression of someone watching something they had forgotten the shape of, something ordinary and lost, something they had decided not to want back, and were revising that position now, quietly, without announcing it. She slid a plate onto the table. He picked up the fork. She sat across from him and ate, and didn't look at him and gave him the privacy of the gesture, and the rain came down, and the candles he'd left on the nightstand were still warm from the morning when she went up that night, and she lay in the old bed in the borrowed shirt and thought about a man who planted roses and remembered the shape of breakfast, and had stopped looking for his brother 3 centuries ago. She thought about that for a long time. She found the library on the 3rd day. Not the sitting room with its shelves, a proper library, behind a door she'd assumed was a closet, floor to ceiling on 3 walls, a rolling ladder on a brass track, a reading chair positioned under the one window that got afternoon light when there was afternoon light, which in Portland in March was a theoretical concept. She stood in the doorway for a long moment. "You can use it," he said, from somewhere behind her. She turned. He was in the hall with a glass of the dark liquid he drank in the evenings, watching her with the expression she was starting to think of as his default. Focused, patient, the look of someone who had learned to find other people interesting as a skill and had gotten very good at it. "This is," she gestured at the room. "Books," he said. "Yes. How many?" I stopped counting at 12,000. He came to stand beside her in the doorway, looking at the shelves. Some are first editions. The ones on the east wall are older than the house, older than 1887. "Yes." She looked at the east wall. The spines were faded, some without visible titles, the leather worn to the color of old skin. "You read all of these?" "Over time." He was quiet for a moment. "Time is the one thing I've always had enough of." She went into the library and stood in the middle of it and looked up at the ceiling, which was painted with something she had to tilt her head to understand. A fresco, faded, a sky full of birds that might have been stylized, or might have been species she didn't recognize. "Did you paint that?" she asked. "No. It was done by..." A pause. "A friend. A long time ago. Do you still see them?" "No." She looked at him. He was looking at the fresco with an expression she recognized, the particular flatness of someone looking at a thing that used to hurt and now just existed, the way old wounds became landmarks rather than injuries. "I'm sorry," she said. "It was a long time ago. That doesn't make it less." He looked at her. Something shifted in his face. Not the small architectural suggestion of a smile she'd seen before. Something more than that. Something that had more structural integrity. "No," he said. "It doesn't." She pulled a book at random from the nearest shelf, poetry, Wallace Stevens, 1923, and took it to the reading chair and read while he stood in the doorway, not quite entering, not quite leaving. The way he occupied the threshold of most rooms she'd noticed him in, as if he had learned to be careful about fully inhabiting spaces. "Come in," she said, without looking up. He came in. He took the chair at the desk in the corner. There was always a desk in his corners, she'd noticed, always a place for work. For purpose, for the thing that didn't require him to simply exist without function, and he opened something and she read her Stevens, and the afternoon dark came early the way it did in March, and neither of them turned on a lamp until it was fully necessary, both of them comfortable in the same dimming light. At dinner she made pasta. She had found in the pantry the specific collection of ingredients that said someone had once lived here who cooked. Before that stopped. She made it the way Agnes Moreau, her 7th foster mother, the good one, had taught her, and she put 2 bowls on the table. He sat. He ate more than he had the first night. She didn't comment on this. "Dorian," she said, into the middle of the meal. "Your brother. What happened? If you want to say." He was quiet for a moment, the weighing kind of quiet, not the evasion kind. "He trusted someone he shouldn't have," Caius said. "A vampire who told him the turn was a gift and didn't tell him what it cost." He set down his fork with the precise deliberateness she associated with him handling things he was being careful with. "I knew the vampire. I should have known the danger. I was occupied with other things, and Dorian paid for my distraction." "How old was he?" 23. A pause. "He'll always be 23. That's the part he can't forgive, I think. Not the turn itself, the permanence. He was going to be a painter. He had shows planned." Wren looked at her pasta. "Does he paint now?" "I don't know. Have you asked?" He looked up. "We don't. Our contact is—" He stopped. The composure shifted slightly, the way a very still surface shifted when something moved underneath. "I've been the thing he's angry at for 3 centuries. At a certain point it seemed kinder to let the distance be what he wanted. Or," Wren said carefully, "it seemed easier for you." The silence after that was a different kind. She met his eyes. He held it. The look, the implication, the directness of it, with the composure of someone who had been told truths before but not recently, not without warning. "Both," he said finally. "Both are true." She nodded, went back to her pasta. "I looked for Marcus for a year," she said. "Then I told myself he'd moved on and I should too, that it was what he wanted." She paused. "I don't actually know if it's what he wanted. I just know it's what I told myself when the looking got hard." He was very still. "You're not particularly gentle about this," he said. "I'm extremely gentle," she said. "I'm just not imprecise." She looked up. "There's a difference." The corner of his mouth moved. She was cataloging these, the small structural suggestions of something warmer, the incremental evidence of a face that had once known how to do more than compose itself. "Yes," he said quietly. "There is." The power went out completely at midnight. She was awake. She'd been reading by candlelight the Stevens. She'd nearly finished it, when the last of the electricity gave up and the house went fully dark except for the fire she'd built up in the sitting room fireplace and the 3 candles on the nightstand. She pulled on the extra layer she'd found in the closet, a cardigan that had belonged to someone with longer arms than her, and went downstairs because the fire was warmer than the bedroom, and she was not particularly interested in lying in the dark performing sleep. He was in the sitting room. Of course he was. He was always somewhere in the house, present in the way of a tide. You couldn't see it happening, but you were always aware of it. He was standing at the window, looking out at the dark street, the garden barely visible in the storm. He turned when she came in, not startled. She had started to understand that he was not startled by things, that his awareness of a room extended further than the visible. "Couldn't sleep," she said. "Not a question, not an apology." "I don't," he said. "Generally." She came to the fire and held her hands out to it. "At all?" "A few hours. Before dawn, usually." He came away from the window and sat in his chair, and she sat in hers, and the fire was between them, and the house was dark beyond the firelight's reach. "It's been a long time since sleeping felt like something I required. What does it feel like now?" "Optional," he said. "Like most things." She looked at the fire. "That sounds lonely." "It is," he said, without hesitation, without self-pity, just the flat accuracy of someone stating a condition they had accepted. "I've had 600 years to become accustomed to it. And are you? Accustomed?" A pause. "No," he said. "You don't become accustomed to loneliness. You become efficient in it, which is not the same thing." Wren pulled the long cardigan sleeves over her hands. The fire snapped. Outside, the rain had eased slightly from assault to persistence. "I've been lonely most of my life," she said. Not dramatically, just the specific loneliness of always being adjacent to families rather than in one. Always knowing where the exit was. She looked at her covered hands. "I got very good at leaving before I was asked to." He was watching her. "Is that why you move?" he said, "city to city." "Partly." She looked up. "And partly because no place had ever felt like the one to stay." "And Portland?" She thought about the bus, the rain, the moment of stopping. "Portland felt like it might be patient enough to let me figure it out." He was quiet for a moment. "And have you? I'm working on it." She held his gaze across the fire. "You should write to him." He didn't need to ask who. "Dorian," she said. "Not to fix 300 years. Just to open the door again. Let him decide whether to walk through." "He may not." "He may not," she agreed, "but you'll know you opened it. That's different from spending another 300 years standing on the wrong side of it." The fire burned between them. His face in the firelight was very still, the way it got when something was happening underneath that he wasn't ready to let surface. "You do this," he said. "Do what?" "Say the thing," he said, "that I have been not saying to myself, with considerable accuracy and no apparent effort." "I spent 18 years in other people's houses," she said. "You learn to read what's not being said. It's survival." He looked at her for a long moment. The amber thing was happening in his eyes, deeper, more present than usual, the quality of something that hadn't been this close to the surface in a long time. "Ren," he said. She waited. He looked at the fire instead. "Thank you," he said, "for the dinners, for this. You let me in out of a flood. You would have been fine." "Probably," she agreed. "But I'm glad I knocked." He looked at her then, the full look, the one he didn't usually land directly for this long, and she held it with the steadiness she'd developed over 21 years of not being somebody's first choice, and she thought, this is the part where I would usually look away. She didn't look away. Neither did he. The fire burned. The storm eased, and in the space between two chairs, 600 years and 21 years found, very carefully, some common ground. The note arrived on the 4th morning, not through the mail, through the window of the guest room, slipped under the sash in the night, folded once, written on paper that smelled of cigarette smoke and oil paint. She found it when she went to open the curtains, a small white rectangle on the old floorboards. She brought it downstairs without opening it. He was in the study. She set it on the desk. He looked at the paper for a long moment before he picked it up. She watched his face while he read it, the specific discipline of watching someone's face while they receive news, the small tectonic things that happened beneath composed surfaces. His jaw tightened. Then, released, then went somewhere else entirely, not anger, not grief, something that contained both, and was also tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. He set the note down. "He knows you're here," he said. She had guessed this. "Is that a problem?" "It depends on what he intends." He looked at the note. He says he wants to meet you, that he has things to say that I've been unable to hear from him, and perhaps a human would listen differently." "That's not threatening," she said carefully. "No." Caius was quiet. "It's Dorian being Dorian. He was always better at angles than direct approaches." He picked up the note again, and she saw something happen in his face that she suspected happened rarely and privately, the thing underneath, briefly visible, the grief and the guilt and the 300 years of it. "He's in Portland." "Did you know?" "I knew he was in the territory. I didn't know he was close." He set the note down. He stopped. "He came here for me. Not for you. I want you to understand that. You are not the target of whatever this is." "I didn't think I was." She looked at the note. "Do you want to see him?" He was quiet for a long time. "I don't know what I want," he said. That's the honest answer. I've been telling myself I don't want this conversation for 300 years, and I'm no longer certain that's true. She sat in the chair across from the desk. What would you say to him? If you saw him? He looked at her. That I'm sorry. That I've been sorry for 300 years, and I didn't know how to say it across the distance we'd both made. He paused. That I found his letters. Eventually, the ones he stopped sending. I have all of them. She was very still. He wrote to you. For 80 years, Caius said. And then he stopped. And I told myself it was because he'd moved on. He looked at the window where the note had come through. I have 412 letters in the east wall of the library behind the Byron collection. I've read them all. The room was very quiet. Caius, she said. He looked at her. Right back, she said. Right now, before you decide not to. He looked at the desk, at the paper and pen that were always there, always ready, because he was a man who believed in preparedness and had never quite let himself use it for this. She got up. She went to the kitchen and made coffee. She stayed there for 20 minutes, giving him the room and the privacy of the thing she'd just asked him to do. When she came back, there was an envelope on the corner of the desk, sealed, addressed in handwriting that was precise and slightly archaic. He was looking at the window. He'll come here, Caius said. When he gets it, he'll want to see you. I need you to be prepared for. Dorian is not. He's not straightforward. He'll try to provoke me through you. He won't hurt you. But he'll be difficult. I work in a diner, Wren said. Difficult is Tuesday. He looked at her. The amber thing in his eyes was very close to the surface. I need to tell you something, he said. She waited. What I am, he said. You know. I think you've known since the first night, since the temperature, she said. And the coffee that was memory rather than habit, and the eyes. The eyes, he said. They do something, she said, in firelight, or maybe all light. They go old, like looking through something instead of at something. He was very still. I'm not afraid of you, she said before he could say whatever he was building toward. I want you to know that's not a performance. I've been cataloging you for 4 days and nothing I've found has made me afraid. You should be more careful, he said. Probably. She set his coffee on the desk. The empty ritual of it, the gesture she'd come to understand, was its own kind of language between them. But careful and afraid are different things. I'm careful. I'm not afraid. He looked at the coffee. Wren, he said. Don't, she said quietly. Don't tell me to be more sensible about this. I've been sensible my whole life. I know what I'm doing. He looked up. She held it. The look, the admission, the full weight of 4 days of something that had been building in the specific patient way of things that didn't know how to be fast. I know, he said, so quietly she almost missed it. So do I. The roads cleared on Thursday afternoon. She packed what she'd come with, not much, a single bag, the work apron she still hadn't taken off on that first night, and stood in the entry hall where she'd dripped on his rug 4 days ago and looked at the house around her. It looked different than it had. Not the house was the same. The Victorian bones, the library, the garden in the rain. She looked different to it. Was the thing. She had a shape in it now, a specific gravity. The guest room was hers in the way that rooms became yours when you slept in them long enough. The kitchen counter where she stood when she cooked. The reading chair. He was in the doorway to the sitting room. The bus on Morrison is running, he said. I know, she'd checked. Thank you for all of it. You made dinner, he said. 4 times. You let me use the library. You finished the Stevens. I'll bring it back, she said, and meant it, and he heard that she meant it, and something in his face did the thing it did now, the structural change, the incremental opening of something that had been closed a long time. Come back before that, he said. She looked at him. Dorian will come, he said. When he gets the letter. He stopped, tried a different approach. I'd like you to be here. When he does. If that's something you're willing to do. You want me here for Dorian, she said carefully. I want you here, he said, and said nothing else. The entry hall was warm. The fire was still going in the sitting room. She could see the reading chair from where she stood. Okay, she said. She left. She walked down the hill in the thin March sun, the flooded roads already draining, Portland returning to its regular shape around her. She went to work the next day. She served coffee and eggs and didn't think about a Victorian house on the East Hills, and wasn't remotely convincing about it. On the second day, there was a book on the counter of the diner. Not from a customer, she'd been in the back when it appeared, and no one had seen who left it. Wallace Stevens, The Collected Poems, 1954 first edition. On the inside cover, in the precise archaic handwriting she recognized, for when you run out of things to read. She held it for a long moment. She put it on the shelf behind the counter where she could see it. She didn't call. She didn't have his number, which was a gap she was going to address. She didn't go back immediately, because she had rent and shifts and the ordinary life she'd been building, and she wasn't going to let 4 days in a Victorian mansion convince her that her ordinary life was insufficient. But on Sunday morning she woke up, and the light through her apartment window was the specific quality of light that had come through the library window, the afternoon when there was afternoon light version, and she lay in her own bed and thought about a man who didn't sleep and had 400 letters he'd never answered, and a brother who was difficult in the way Tuesdays were difficult. And she got up and got dressed and got on the bus. She knocked on the gate, not the door. Waited. He opened the gate from the intercom she hadn't noticed before. She went up the path, the rhododendrons still enormous, still wet, the stones still uneven, and the front door opened before she reached it. He was in the doorway. The Stevens, she said, holding up the collected poems. Thank you. You didn't have to come in person. No, she agreed. I didn't. He stepped back from the door. She went in. Dorian came on a Wednesday. She was there. She'd been coming to the house 3 evenings a week. A rhythm that had established itself without being discussed. The way rhythms did when 2 people found a frequency that worked, and neither wanted to disrupt it by naming it. She brought food. He had started actually eating it, which she tracked privately as the most significant development of the past 2 weeks. She was in the library when she heard the door. She heard Caius go still, the specific quality of his stillness when something changed in the house, the way the air pressure shifted. She stayed where she was, because she had been told Dorian would be difficult, and she trusted the warning, and also trusted herself, and the library was a good room to be trusted in. Dorian Vielle was 23 years old forever, which meant he looked it, dark-haired like his brother, but where Caius was still, Dorian was all restless energy, the specific vitality of someone who has never stopped being young, and knows it, and has complicated feelings about both. He was in paint-stained jeans. Of course he was. He still painted. She had suspected this. He appeared in the library doorway. He looked at her with amber eyes that were the same as his brother's but angrier, or rather the anger was closer to the surface, not 6 centuries of management deep. You're smaller than I expected, he said. You're younger, she said. He blinked. Then something in his face shifted, not warmth, but the possibility of it, the way a room shifted when someone opened a window. He said you were direct, Dorian said. He said you were difficult, she said. I work Tuesdays. Sit down. He sat. In her reading chair, which she noted and chose not to address, she heard Caius in the doorway behind her and did not turn around, because this moment was not hers to manage and she understood that. You wrote back, Dorian said, to his brother, not to her. Yes, Caius said. 400 letters and you wrote back when she was here. Yes. Dorian looked at Wren. What did you do to him? Made dinner, she said. Mostly. Something in his face cracked, not broke, cracked, the specific fracture of something under too much pressure for too long, finding the one point that would give. "He has the letters," Dorian said. "You knew that. He told me. He's kept them for—" Dorian stopped. His jaw was tight. 300 years of letters, and he kept them all. "He read them all," she said. "I think that's the part that matters." The library was very quiet. Caius had come into the room fully, she realized, not in the doorway, not on the threshold, fully in the room, which she understood was significant and filed carefully. "I'm not forgiving you tonight," Dorian told his brother. "I know," Caius said. I need to know you understand what those years were." "I do," Caius said. "I've understood it for 3 centuries. I didn't know how to say that across the distance." "She does," Dorian said, with a gesture toward Ren that was not quite an accusation. "She knows how to say things." "Yes," Caius said. "She does." Dorian looked at her for a long moment. Something shifted in him, the restlessness settling slightly, not gone, just repositioned. "He's going to be terrible at this," Dorian told her. "Feelings. He's had 600 years of practice at not having them, and he's going to be catastrophically bad at having them in front of another person. I've noticed," she said. "You should know what you're getting into. I'm getting into it anyway," she said. Dorian was quiet. Then, good. He said it simply, stripped of the difficulty, and she understood that this was his version of the nod the elder at the court had given, not approval exactly. Acknowledgement. The recognition of something real. He stayed for 2 hours. He and Caius talked in the study with the door mostly closed, and she read in the library and heard, twice, Dorian's voice raised, and then lowered, and then raised again, and once, something that was Caius, quieter, that she couldn't make out but that had a quality she hadn't heard from him before. Unguarded. Not composed. The sound of something long held beginning to be released. When Dorian left, he stopped in the library doorway. "The letters," he said. "I want to read them back." "Ask him," she said. "He'll give them to me," Dorian said. "He'll give me anything right now because of you." "Not because of me," she said. "Because he's been ready for 300 years. I just opened the window." She looked at him. "You painted it. The birds on the ceiling." He looked up at the fresco. Something went through his face. "He kept them," he said. "The paintings. He keeps everything," she said. "He just doesn't always say so." Dorian left. Caius came back to the library and sat in the other chair. His chair, because she'd taken back the reading chair, and they sat in the dark room, and she didn't ask how it had been, and he didn't tell her yet. And the fresco was overhead, and the fire was low, and outside Portland was doing what it did, and she thought, "This is it. This is the place where I stop." She thought it without ceremony, without performance. She just thought it, and it was true. He says it first. He said it 3 days later. Not in a dramatic moment, she would think about this later, that it happened without scaffolding, no fire, no storm, no particular quality of light. She was in the kitchen making coffee. He came in from the study. She handed him the empty mug, the ritual of it, the gesture that was its own language between them, and he stood there holding it, and she turned back to the counter, and he said, "I love you." She turned around. He was holding the mug. He was very still. His expression had the quality of someone who had said something they'd been carrying a long time and was now fully exposed to the weather of however it was received, without the protection of composure. "I'm aware," he said, carefully, "that you've been here 3 weeks, that this is, by any reasonable standard, too fast for a declaration. I'm also aware that reasonable standards are calibrated for people who have average lifespans, and I don't, and I have watched enough time pass to know the difference between what is ordinary and what is real." He set the mug down. "I'm not asking you to match it. I'm telling you because you told me once that you'd spent your life learning what wasn't being said. And I didn't want you to have to do that with me." Ren stood at the counter. She thought about 12 placements, 12 exits. the habit of leaving before being asked. The feeling of being adjacent to things rather than in them. She thought about a gate she'd opened in a flood, a door that opened before she knocked, a book left on a diner counter with handwriting she recognized. She crossed the kitchen. She put both hands on either side of his face, his still ancient, currently completely uncomposed face, and she kissed him, and he made a sound she would remember for the rest of her life, something between relief and ruin, the sound of 600 years of careful distance choosing, for once, to close. He kissed her back with the full, deliberate attention he gave to everything, his hands at her waist, careful, and then not careful, warm in the specific way she'd noticed he could be warm when he was present rather than managed. She pulled back. She looked at him. "I love you too," she said. "I've known for about a week. I was waiting to be sure it wasn't just the house." "Is it the house?" She looked around the kitchen, the French press, the garden through the window, the empty mug. "No," she said. "It's you. The house is a bonus." He laughed. A real one, actual laughter, not the infrastructure of it but the thing itself, and she stored the sound of it immediately, put it somewhere she would keep, because it was new and real and hers. "I have a very good house," he said. "You really do." She agreed. She went back to the coffee. He stood at the counter beside her, closer than before, his arm against hers, and the kitchen was warm and Portland was gray outside the window, and the garden was doing what it wanted, the way gardens did when you left them long enough, and everything was, for the first time in 21 years, exactly where it was supposed to be. The territory acknowledges her. Word traveled. In the vampire community of Portland, the way word traveled in any community, sideways, inexact, arriving before anyone meant it to. She was aware of this because Caius told her, directly, because he had started telling her things directly as a practice, a new one, the deliberate reversal of 6 centuries of managed distance. He told her that his territory included 11 other vampires, that they were aware of her, that 2 of them had opinions. "What kind of opinions?" she asked. "The kind that are none of their business," he said, "but which they have anyway." She thought about Dorian, who had come back twice since the library night, not easy visits, not comfortable, the work of 300 years being done in real time, which was painful and necessary, and she stayed out of it unless she was asked in. She thought about the Elder's Nod, which she had not experienced here but understood existed in some form. "I want to meet them," she said. He looked at her. "Not a formal thing," she said. "Not an announcement. Just, I'm in your life and your life includes them and I'd rather know who they are than have them be abstract." He was quiet for a moment. "Some of them will be difficult. Dorian was difficult. Dorian is my brother. He has a specific motivation for eventually coming around." He paused. "Others won't have the same motivation. Then they'll be difficult for longer," she said. "I'm not asking for approval. I'm asking to not be a secret." He looked at her for a long moment. "You've never let anyone make you small," he said. "Have you? Many people have tried," she said. "I got better at not cooperating." He turned to the desk, picked up the pen. "I'll make arrangements." The gathering was small, 6 of his territory, the ones he trusted most, a Thursday evening at the house. She made dinner because she made dinner, and she wasn't going to perform a different version of herself because of witnesses. She made the pasta she'd made the first storm week, and set the table for herself and Caius and let the others find their own arrangements, which they did. The particular choreography of very old beings navigating a new variable. A woman named Vera, dark-eyed, 300 years old, the composure of a Supreme Court judge, watched Wren through the first hour with the assessment she was used to by now from the very old. At dinner, Vera came to stand beside her at the kitchen counter. "He set a place for you," Vera said, at the head of the table. "He sets it there every night," Wren said. Which was true. "I tried to move it once. He moved it back." Vera was quiet for a moment. "He set a place at that table for the first time in 40 years. Ren looked at her. I know. You know what you are to him. I know what I am to him, Ren said. I'm still figuring out what that means for everything else. But I'm not in a hurry. She handed Vera a glass. Dinner's ready. Vera took the glass. She looked at Ren with the full 400-year assessment, the kind that had seen empires and knew what lasted and what didn't. Good, she said. It was not an endorsement. It was the beginning of one, which was all Ren had asked for. After, Caius came to find her in the library where she'd gone when the gathering moved to the study. He stood in the doorway and then came all the way in, fully, the way he always did now, no threshold hesitation, no managed distance. Vera, he said. Seemed fine, Ren said. She told me you were direct. Everyone tells you that. It's consistently the first thing they notice. He sat in his chair. She also said, he paused. She said she was glad. That she hadn't expected to be. But she was. Ren looked at him over her book. You have good people. I do, he said. I'd forgotten. She went back to the book. He picked up the Stevens from the desk. He'd been reading it, she'd noticed, working through it carefully. And they sat in the library in the old chairs, and outside Portland was doing what Portland did, and the house was full of people for the first time in a long time, and it was warm all the way through. Spring arrived in Portland the way it always did, tentatively, provisionally, as if it wasn't fully committed to the endeavor and wanted to keep its options open. Ren noticed it first in the garden. She was at the kitchen window on a Sunday morning. Their Sunday mornings had a shape now, a specific unhurried quality, coffee and the particular light, and his presence in the study until she appeared, and then his presence in the kitchen, which had become the most consistent thing she had ever had, and something in the garden was different. The roses, she said. He came to stand beside her. The chill of him was familiar now, present, registered, not alarming, just his particular way of being near. The roses were budding, still bare branches mostly, but at the ends, small tight possibility. They do that, he said, every year. I forget, and then they do it again. How many years? Here? He considered. 137. More or less. She looked at the buds. And you still forget? The years in between are very long. He looked at her. This one has been shorter. She leaned into him slightly, not dramatically, just the natural drift of two people who had found their preferred proximity and stopped performing distance. He put his arm around her shoulders, the careful then not careful way he touched her now. Dorian called, she said. I know. He called me after. He wants to come for dinner Sunday. Regular, he said. She paused. He said he wants to try having something regular. Caius was quiet for a moment. She felt the quality of the quiet, the weight of 300 years and 400 letters and whatever had happened in the study on that first night, the specific gravity of a wound that had been carried so long it had become structural, and was now very slowly, very carefully, being set down. Yes, he said. She turned her face toward him. He was looking at the garden, at the roses, at the tentative buds that came back every year without being asked. I should tell you something, he said. She waited. I looked for you, he said, before you came. Not for you specifically, I didn't know you. But I've been aware for some time that the distance I'd built was something I'd chosen, not something that was required. And I had begun to wonder, not actively, not hopefully, just in the quiet way things occur to you after 600 years, whether it was possible for it to be different. He looked at her. I hadn't answered that question when you knocked on my door. And now? She said. And now, he said. I know the answer. Outside, the rosebuds held their small, impossible promise against the March sky. In the kitchen, the coffee was warm. In the library, 412 letters sat behind the Byron collection, waiting to be handed back to the brother who'd written them, whenever he was ready. Ren looked at the garden and thought about a bus she'd gotten off in the rain, and a hill, and a gate she'd opened without knowing what was at the top of it. She thought about 12 placements and 12 exits, and the habit of leaving before being asked. She thought about staying. It felt, she decided, exactly like she'd thought it would feel, not dramatic, not the thunderclap of 100 stories she'd never quite believed. Just the quiet, specific certainty of something that fit. She put her hand over his where it rested on her shoulder. He turned his hand and held hers. The roses would bloom in 6 weeks. Dorian would come for dinner on Sunday, and it would be difficult, and then easier, and then, eventually, just Sunday. Vera would come around fully in the spring, and 2 of the others would take longer, and 1 would never come around entirely, and that would be fine. The diner on Morrison would get a new apostrophe on the logo. She would request it herself. Finally, she would bring her things up the hill in 2 trips, because she didn't own much, which had always been practical and was now simply accurate. She would take the reading chair. He would pretend to object. He would not actually object. She would learn the territory. All of it, the way she'd always learned places, detail by detail, floor by floor, the specific knowledge that came from staying long enough to know where everything was. She would stay. Outside, Portland did what it did, gray and patient and full of hills, full of old houses with lights in the windows, full of storms that came in sideways and tested what you were made of. She was made, it turned out, of something that held. She always had been.